Imagine a time not too long ago in a country called America. In this country, there were wonderful things like big, shiny cars, delicious pizza, and incredible music that could make your feet tap and your heart sing. But there was also something very sad and unfair. People with different skin colors were not always treated the same. This story is about two men, very different from each other, who went on a long car ride together and discovered that friendship can be found in the most unexpected of places. Our story begins in a bustling, noisy city called New York. In a part of the city called the Bronx lived a man named Tony Vallelonga. Everyone called him Tony Lip because he was very good at talking. He could talk his way into things and out of things. Tony was a big man with a big family whom he loved very much. He had a wife named Dolores and two young sons. Tony's job was to be a bouncer at a fancy nightclub. A bouncer is like a friendly giant who makes sure everyone inside is safe and behaving well. If someone was causing trouble, it was Tony's job to politely but firmly ask them to leave. Tony was very good at his job because he was strong and knew how to handle difficult people. One day, the nightclub where Tony worked had to close for a little while for some repairs. This meant Tony was out of a job and needed to find a new way to make money to take care of his family. He was a man who would do almost any job to make sure his family had food on the table and a roof over their heads. Around the same time, in another part of New York City, lived a man named Dr. Don Shirley. Dr. Shirley was a very different kind of man from Tony. He was a famous piano player, a true genius of music. When his fingers danced across the black and white keys of a piano, they created the most beautiful melodies you could ever imagine. He was so good that he played for important people all over the world. Dr. Shirley was an African American man, which meant his skin was a different color from Tony's. He was also very elegant and well-spoken. He lived in a beautiful apartment above a famous music hall called Carnegie Hall. His home was filled with amazing treasures from his travels, like a throne from a faraway land. Dr. Shirley was planning a concert tour. This meant he was going to travel to many different cities and play his wonderful music for people. But this tour was going to be a little different and a little dangerous. He wasn't going to be playing in the big cities in the north, where things were a little more fair for people of his skin color. Instead, he was planning a tour through the deep south of America. In the 1960s, which is when our story takes place, the South was a very difficult and scary place for African American people. There were unfair rules called segregation, which meant that people with black skin and people with white skin had to use separate things. They couldn't eat in the same restaurants. They couldn't stay in the same hotels. And they couldn't even use the same bathrooms. It was a very unkind way to live. Because of these dangers, Dr. Shirley needed more than just a driver. He needed someone who could also be his protector, a bodyguard to keep him safe. And that's how Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley's paths were about to cross. Tony heard about a doctor who needed a driver and went for an interview. He was surprised to find that the doctor was not a medical doctor, but a doctor of music, and that he lived in such a grand apartment. When Tony met Dr. Shirley, they were like night and day. Tony was loud and loved to eat and talk. Dr. Shirley was quiet, very proper, and very serious. Dr. Shirley sat on his throne-like chair and interviewed Tony. He needed to be sure that Tony was the right man for the job. He asked Tony if he would have any problem working for a black man. Tony, who just wanted a job to support his family, said it wouldn't be a problem. And so the deal was made. Tony was hired to be Dr. Shirley's driver for the 8-week concert tour. Before they left, the record company that Dr. Shirley worked for gave Tony a special book. It was called the Negro Motorist Green Book. This little book was a very important guide for African American travelers in the South. It listed all the safe places where they could eat, sleep, and get gas for their car. Without this green book, a journey through the South for a black person could be very dangerous. With the green book in hand, Tony and Dr. Shirley set off on their long journey in a beautiful big turquoise-colored car. The plan was to drive through many states and be back in New York just in time for Christmas. At first, the two men did not get along very well at all. They were so different in every way. Tony loved to talk and would fill the car with his stories and questions. Dr. Shirley preferred silence and would often correct Tony's way of speaking. Tony would eat with his hands, munching on fried chicken in the car and throwing the bones out of the window. This horrified the very neat and tidy doctor. Shirley, Dr. Shirley, on the other hand, would sit in the back seat like a king, and Tony felt more like a chauffeur than a travel companion. One of their first arguments was about music. Tony loved listening to popular music on the radio, songs that were fun and easy to sing along to. But Dr. Shirley did not like this music. He was a classical pianist who played the music of famous composers like Chopin. He thought the music Tony liked was not very sophisticated. They argued about what to listen to in the car, a small sign of how different their worlds were. As they drove deeper and deeper into the South, Tony started to see with his own eyes the unfairness that Dr. Shirley had to face every single day. One evening after a concert, Dr. Shirley went to a local bar by himself. A group of mean men saw him there, and because he was black, they started to bully him and were about to hurt him badly. Tony, who had been told to always keep an eye on Dr. Shirley, arrived just in time. He used his strength and his tough guy attitude to scare the men away and rescue Dr. Shirley. From that day on, Tony understood that this was not just a driving job. He really had to be a protector. The journey continued, and so did the lessons for Tony. In one town, they went to a fancy store so Dr. Shirley could buy a new suit. The man in the store was happy to sell a suit to Dr. Shirley. But when Dr. Shirley asked if he could try it on in the dressing room first, the man said no. He said the dressing rooms were for white people only. Tony was shocked and angry. How could someone sell a man an expensive suit but not let him try it on? It didn't make any sense, and it was incredibly mean. Another time, after a beautiful concert where everyone clapped and cheered for Dr. Shirley's amazing music, the man who had hired him to play, the owner of the mansion where the concert was held, refused to let Dr. Shirley use the bathroom inside his house. He told him he had to walk outside to a small old outhouse. Dr. Shirley, a man of great pride and dignity, refused to be treated this way. He said he would not play the concert if he was not treated with respect. Tony stood by him, ready to drive him away. Finally, the owner of the mansion gave in, but the hurtful moment stayed with both men. These moments began to change Tony. He had grown up in a neighborhood where he didn't know many black people, and he had some unfair ideas about them. But now he was seeing firsthand how a good and talented man like Dr. Shirley was being treated just because of the color of his skin. His heart began to soften, and a new kind of respect for Dr. Shirley started to grow. While on the road, Tony missed his wife Dolores very much. He promised to write to her, but Tony was not very good with words. His letters were short and simple. Dr. Shirley, who was a very educated and poetic man, saw Tony struggling to write a letter one night. He offered to help. At first, Tony was too proud to accept help, but eventually he did. Dr. Shirley began to help Tony write the most beautiful romantic letters to his wife. He taught Tony how to express his feelings in a way that would make Dolores's heart melt, and it worked. When Dolores received these letters, she was so touched and impressed by her husband's beautiful words. She even read them to her friends, who were amazed. This was a secret that Tony and Dr. Shirley shared, a small bond of friendship that was starting to form between them. The journey wasn't all sadness and unfairness. There were moments of humor and connection too. Tony encouraged Dr. Shirley to loosen up a little. He taught him how to enjoy simple things, like eating a piece of fried chicken for the first time. Dr. Shirley, who usually ate with a knife and fork, was hesitant at first, but with Tony's encouragement, he took a bite and discovered that it was delicious. It was a small, funny moment, but it was a big step in their growing friendship. But the dangers of the South were always there. One rainy night, a police car pulled them over. The police officers were not friendly. They were mean and disrespectful to Dr. Shirley. They made them get out of the car in the pouring rain. One of the police officers said something very insulting to Tony because he was Italian. Tony, who had a quick temper, lost his cool and punched the police officer. This was a very bad idea. The police arrested both of them and put them in jail. Sitting in the cold, dark jail cell, both men were scared. They didn't know what would happen to them. Dr. Shirley, who was a very well-connected man, was allowed to make one phone call. Tony thought he was calling a lawyer, but Dr. Shirley did something much more surprising. He called the Attorney General of the United States, a very powerful man named Robert F. Kennedy. Because Dr. Shirley was a famous artist, he knew important people who could help. And it worked. The governor of the state was called, and soon after the police unlocked the jail cell and let them go. Back in the car, they had a big argument. Tony was angry that Dr. Shirley had to use his connections to get them out of trouble. Dr. Shirley was angry at Tony for losing his temper and making the situation worse. But during this argument, they both said some very important things. Dr. Shirley confessed how lonely he felt. He was a black man, but he was so educated and sophisticated that he didn't feel like he belonged in the black community. But the white community, for whom he played his beautiful music, would never truly accept him either. They would clap for him on stage, but then they wouldn't let him eat in their restaurants or sleep in their hotels. He felt like he didn't belong anywhere. Tony listened, and for the first time, he started to understand the deep sadness and loneliness that Dr. Shirley carried with him. He realized that Dr. Shirley's life was much more complicated than he had ever imagined. After this argument, something shifted between them. They started to see each other not just as a boss and a driver, but as two human beings, two friends who were in this together. The tour was coming to an end. Their last concert was in a city called Birmingham, Alabama, on Christmas Eve. This was supposed to be a very special performance at a fancy country club. But when they arrived, the manager of the club told Dr. Shirley that he was not allowed to eat dinner in the same dining room as the white guests. He was expected to eat his meal in a small, cramped storage closet. This was the final straw. After all they had been through, after all the disrespect and unfairness, Dr. Shirley was not going to accept this. He told the manager that if he couldn't eat in the dining room with the other guests, then he would not play the concert. The manager was shocked. He had a room full of people waiting to hear the famous Dr. Don Shirley play. Tony stood by Dr. Shirley's side. He told the manager that they were leaving. This was a big decision. If Dr. Shirley didn't play, he would be breaking his contract and might get into a lot of trouble with the record company. But for Tony and Dr. Shirley, their dignity and their friendship were more important than any contract. So they walked out of the fancy country club, leaving the surprised and angry manager behind. It was Christmas Eve, and they didn't have a place to go for dinner. Tony, using his street smarts, found a small, cozy club in a black neighborhood. It was a lively place filled with music and laughter. When they walked in, everyone was curious to see this well-dressed black man and his white driver. Tony told the people in the club that Dr. Shirley was a famous piano player. The band that was playing invited Dr. Shirley to join them on stage. At first, Dr. Shirley was hesitant. This was not the kind of music he usually played. It was blues and jazz, music that came from the heart and soul of the Black community. But then he sat down at the piano and he started to play. He played with a joy and a freedom that he rarely showed in his formal concerts. The whole club came alive with his music. He was no longer the lonely doctor, Shirley who didn't belong anywhere. In that small club, surrounded by people who looked like him and who understood his music, he was home. After that wonderful night, it was time to drive back to New York. They had a long way to go and wanted to be home for Christmas. The journey back was different. They were no longer a boss and a driver. They were friends. They talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams. As they were driving through a snowstorm, another police car started to follow them. Both Tony and Dr. Shirley tensed up, expecting more trouble. But this time, the police officer was kind. He saw that their car had a flat tire, and he helped them change it. He wished them a Merry Christmas and sent them on their way. It was a small act of kindness that showed them that not everyone was filled with hate. They finally made it back to the Bronx on Christmas Eve, just as they had planned. Tony was so happy to be home with his family. He invited Dr. Shirley to come inside and have Christmas dinner with them. But Dr. Shirley, who was used to being alone, politely said no and went back to his grand, empty apartment. Tony went inside and was greeted with big hugs and kisses from his wife and kids. His whole family was there, and the house was filled with the smell of delicious food and the sound of happy chatter. But Tony couldn't stop thinking about his friend Doctor Shirley, all alone on Christmas Eve. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. When Tony opened it, he saw Dr. Shirley standing there. He had changed his mind. He had decided that he didn't want to be alone on Christmas. Tony's face lit up with a huge smile. He welcomed Dr. Shirley into his home, into the warmth and chaos of his big, loving family. Tony's wife, Dolores, gave Dr. Shirley a big hug and thanked him for helping Tony write such beautiful letters. The whole family welcomed him with open arms, and for the first time in a very long time, Dr. Don Shirley, the brilliant and lonely piano man, felt like he truly belonged. And so our story ends with two very different men who started out as strangers, becoming the best of friends. They learned from each other, they protected each other, and they helped each other become better people. Their journey through the deep South in that beautiful turquoise car was not just a concert tour. It was a journey of the heart, a journey that taught them that friendship can be a bridge that connects two very different worlds, and that a little bit of kindness and understanding can make the world a much better place for everyone. They remained friends for the rest of their lives, a testament to the fact that what is in a person's heart is so much more important than the color of their skin.